Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome to another episode. It has been a little while. Today, we're going to be looking at a topic which was really inspired by a tweet that I came across. It was not something I had initially planned to do. Originally, I was going to do just a kind of long tribute to Bernard Hill, who was the actor who played King Theoden in the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films. He passed away, I think it was yesterday or the day before, very suddenly, at the age of 79. And I think a lot of people who enjoyed those films really felt something quite personal about it. It wasn't just another actor, it was somebody who played a part in such a powerful way that we had an affinity for the character of King Theoden. And so a lot of people on Twitter, on social media, were, sending their condolences and remembering what Bernard did. And so initially, I was going to kind of honor his memory by doing a kind of deep dive into the character of King Theoden and his some of the important things which are related to him. But then I think either that day or the day before, there was this big storm kicked off because of a tweet somebody had sent out, a relatively big account within these circles, basically kind of attacking Tolkien's work. And so, what we'll do in this stream is we're going to look at this tweet. We're going to maybe see what the argument is that's being put forward here, and then see whether it holds up to scrutiny. And we might even try to strengthen it or take a different angle to the argument that's being developed. But before we get into it, we'll just give folks another couple of minutes to come in. I'll update you to what I've been up to lately. So last week I was down in London for a few days, and I got to see some of the great sights. It was good fun. I went to Westminster Abbey, which was absolutely spectacular. Really heaving, like there's just so many tourists in there. But what a place to go and see where kings and queens for over 1,000 years, since the time of William the Conqueror, have been crowned king. Like, it was an amazing place to go. And every corner, like you turn a corner, oh, there's Henry VII, there's Elizabeth I, there's Edward III. It was a bit overwhelming. In a way, it almost it was difficult to comprehend. Like, if there had just been one or two of them, two of these monarchs, it would have been even more special in some way. But because they're all there, it became almost normalized. Oh, there's another monarch from history who I was reading about the other day. But it was stunning inside. The gold in it. I've never seen a church with so much gold within it. And then going up into the gallery and looking down onto Westminster Abbey, seeing where Charles III was crowned king not so long ago, it was really special. But I think the place that there's two other places that I went to in particular. One was London Mithraeum. It's in the bottom of the Bloomberg building in London, because just around that area, archaeologists discovered the remains of a Roman temple to Mithras. Now, Mithras was the god of a kind of mystery cult within the late Roman Empire, and it would have been quite a big temple. But you would go down underground into the darkness, and only men would be allowed. It was an exclusive club, invitation only. These would be powerful, influential men. They would go down into the temple, and there they would perform a ritual. Now, the actual kind of story of Mithras, or the image that you find, is of him slaying a bull, and this stands at the center of the zodiac, so the calendar, the cosmos. Mithras then is this story of slaying the bull, the killing of this beast, is seen as the source of life, the source of kind of like the cosmic source, which everything else revolves around and finds its center. Now, archaeologists were saying it would have been impossible to be killing a bull in that temple. It's too small. I don't know. I think there was space. But uh, they suggest other things may have been going on, like feasting, chanting, and etc. etc. Um, so this experience that you go on, they've actually taken the remains that they found, the archaeological remains, and put them into a room, which you can enter, and then they kind of do an experience. It's worth going to. It's free as well, so I would recommend it to anybody who's in London. Go to London Mithraeum. And as 99 Iron Duke says in the chat, Mithras was very popular with Roman soldiers, and of course there would be a large number of Roman soldiers stationed in the British Isles during the 300s and 400s. Well, not the early 400s, I should say. And many of the, being a frontier realm, it was vital that there were troops here. So you can see why there would be a cult of Mithras in London, which was the economic center. So that was really good. And then the other place I went to was the Temple Church in the Inns of Court. Now, the Temple Church is it was built by the Knights Templar. The order founded originally in 1118, gets approved in 1127. It's a religious order, you might say, or a combination of the monk and the knight. Each Templar isn't a monk per se, but they live according to a rule, a way of life, which conforms with the monastic in terms of poverty, chastity, and obedience. At least that's how it was supposed to be. But at the same time, they were warriors. Their purpose was to defend pilgrims who would go to the Holy Land, who were quite vulnerable to attack from raiders, pirates, Islamic armies, even after the First Crusade. Because one of the things that's often missed is, okay, the Crusaders took large parts of the Middle East, but it wasn't like they took like a whole country. It's actually they took like towns and cities and castles. But the Muslims still held other castles, and there were different Muslim factions at play. So there needed to be a military order who could protect these pilgrims. There needed to be a military presence to defend the Kingdom of Jerusalem and its principalities, and the Templars and other military orders that crop up play that role. So, but as part of that, they needed to raise funds. They needed to generate wealth and recruits. And so they had bases all across Christendom. And one of these was in London. And they had a church built in London, the Temple Church. It is in the design of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem being the church which is built upon where Christ's tomb was, and thus where Christ rose from the dead. And in the medieval mind, this is the center point of the world. The Holy Sepulchre is the center point, it's the beginning of the new creation. Everything finds its source here. And in some way, in their minds, being in a building which is like the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, in the same shape, in the same design, worshipping in it, you are in some sense connected to the Holy Sepulchre. You are in some sense entering into the center of reality. So it was quite a magnificent, majestic, almost like a portal to the heart of the world. And within its confines are buried a number of people, and most famously or importantly is William Marshall. Now, William Marshall, he would deserve his own stream. I can't do him justice in this short little bit, but William was a knight, one of the greatest knights who ever lived, if not the greatest. As a young man, he fought in many tournaments and was a champion. He defeated over 500 knights in his career. He then went on to be a key lieutenant of Henry II, and during Henry II's wars with his sons, he remained loyal to the king and was key to the king's victory over Richard the Lionheart and King John. Later, when King John was being tyrannical, taking lands away from barons without any just cause, locking them up, taking their wealth, the Marshal remained loyal, even though John had acted recklessly, and was involved in the development of the Magna Carta. When King John died and the young Henry III ascended to the throne, the Marshal was made regent of England, and he was crucial in pushing back King Louis of France, who had taken large parts of the south of England. He then, as regent, ratified or reissued the Magna Carta, which John had gone back on. So really establishing the principles within the Magna Carta into English law, particularly for our purposes. The key kind of clause, is it? I can't remember which clause it is, but it's to the effect of no man will be tried, or no man will be sent to jail without being facing a jury of his peers. So the crown can't limit your freedom arbitrarily, can't punish you arbitrarily. So, and then towards the end of his life, as he was dying, he was initiated into the Knights Templar. It had always been his dream to join the order, and so eventually, as he was lying on his deathbed, he became a Knights Templar, and that is why he and his sons are buried within the Temple Church. So it was a real honor to see his grave, and yeah, there'll be some stuff about the Knights Templar in Arthur's day. One of the things I've been reading up on is the kind of foundation of holy orders, because this is what's happening at the time that people are interested in the Holy Grail. It's almost and so, some of the Holy Grail stories are very clearly kind of influenced by Cistercian monks and Knights Templars and so on. So yeah, this it all kind of ties in to what's going on there. But yeah, just to be in the presence of where he was buried, it was very special. And in a way, like, although I saw these graves of the kings and queens of England and a few of Scotland, seeing his was the greatest experience. So yeah, I've been to a few places which were really good. I'd recommend them to anyone who has the time in London. So, without further ado, let's get into the main topic. I should say, welcome to everybody again. It's good to see so many friends in the chat. And if you have any comments, please put them in there. If you have any questions or anything, please put them in. Towards the end of the stream, I'll look at comments. Super chats get priority. But anything else, I'll see if I have time to get to. So let's look at this mysterious tweet I keep referencing, that was kind of at the heart of motivating this response stream. So let me see, share screen. So this, hopefully you can see that. This is the tweet in question. It's by somebody called Catgirl Kulak, Anarch Onomicon. Now, I'm just going to remove the veil for a second here. This is not actually a cat girl. I saw a video. This guy's been on Alex Kashuta. It's a dude. This is a persona, obviously, that this guy has, and he writes the following: kind of hate Tolkien. He took everything beautiful about Celtic and Germanic paganism, then made it uglier, and used its beauty to attack and subvert the ethnos, telling a story about how Europeans shouldn't defend themselves with power, but just fade away into the West, i.e. die. It goes on. Boromir did nothing wrong. Galadriel betrayed her people by suffering Frodo to live. Gandalf is an evil inversion of Wagner's Wotan, who instead of conspiring to gain the ring and save Valhalla, conspires to escape responsibility and foist it on the weakest. Now, this is obviously quite a baity post, right? And it worked. Look at the number of retweets and comments. People were rightly kind of appalled at this sort of comment, and it's a really bad take. Also, there's not much in the way of argumentation here. It's difficult to kind of really go into it. But this person, I mean, let's see. So they do have 58,000 followers. A number of them are people within our sphere. So this isn't just like some nobody or someone on. This is somebody who has some degree of influence. And so I thought it might be worthwhile doing a little bit here, and it gives us a chance to actually explore Tolkien more fully and maybe wrestle with some of the tensions we find in Tolkien. Because as we go on, we'll see that he does integrate a number of pagan and Christian elements within the Lord of the Rings. To my mind, it's why it is so compelling. It brings together different aspects from maybe a Saxon pagan culture or Saxon Christian culture, and maybe a more medieval Christian culture. And he brings these two things together, and it works really well. But these two cultures or different perspectives on the world do have disagreements. They do have different emphases. And as a consequence, there may be tensions within Tolkien's work. There may be limitations. And so we can kind of explore that using this pretty awful take. So where to begin? Well, I think the first point is that Tolkien doesn't conceive of his work as an allegory for political dynamics, because clearly within this take is being read as kind of an instruction as to how one should act politically. Because look at what's being said. It's suggesting that it's subverting the ethnos, white Europeans, white Celts, Germans, etc., by saying they shouldn't defend themselves with power. And we know what the context of this is, right, in today's world, given Western societies have had enforced multiculturalism. We're seeing mass immigration on a huge scale. Cultures are actually being wiped out in places like London. So the Cockney culture is pretty much dead now. It's been there for 150 years. It's gone. It's been replaced by immigrants moving into the area, the white residents moving out. I actually did a kind of stream on this a while ago. It was the BBC did a documentary on this, and this is the reality. So you could say this is what's partly motivating this kind of response. And on a superficial level, we see a couple of things. We see in this tweet, well, the ring gives you power or absolute power, the power to kind of defeat Sauron, let's say, or use it against Sauron. And Tolkien continued throughout the story, rebukes this take. Boromir, who tries to take the ring, for example, he thinks he can use it to defend Gondor. Well, he is condemned for this, and he ends up dead. Gandalf is mentioned here. He has the opportunity to take the ring. He says, no, I'm not going to take it. It would corrupt me. I would become something evil. Rather, the only way to deal with it is to destroy it. And he lets Frodo and the hobbits kind of take this burden on. And additionally, and fade away into the west here, this is another aspect of the story, is that the elves within Middle-earth, Elrond and Rivendell, Galadriel and Lothlorien, these kind of civilizations and races they recognize their time is over, and so they don't play an active role within the story. They maybe help our uh, heroes at various points, but they're kind of resigned to to the end of their peoples, and so they let the world fade away and eventually leave into the West. Right. So this tweet's kind of bringing together lots of different aspects of the story to try and criticize it. But as I was saying, the first point is it's not a political story, and I'm going to reference something, one of Tolkien's letters here, letter 183, and he says the following: "I dislike the use of political in such context." That is Frodo's journey. "It seems to me false. It seems clear to me that Frodo's duty was humane, not political. He naturally thought first of the Shire, since his roots were there, but the quest had as its object not the preserving of this or that polity, such as half the republic, half aristocracy of the Shire, but the liberation from an evil tyranny of all the humane, including those, such as Easterlings and Haradrim, that were still servants of the tyranny. Denethor, the steward of Gondor, was tainted with mere politics, hence his failure and his mistrust of Faramir. It had become for him a prime motive to preserve the polity of Gondor, as it was against another potentate, who had made himself stronger and was to be feared and opposed for that reason, rather than because he was ruthless and wicked. Denethor despised lesser men, and one may be sure did not distinguish between orcs and the allies of Mordor. If he had survived as victor, even without the use of the ring, he would have taken a long stride towards becoming himself a tyrant, and the terms and treatment he accorded to the deluded peoples of East and South would have been cruel and vengeful. He had become a political leader, Gondor against the rest. But that was not the policy or duty set out by the Council of Elrond. Only after hearing the debate and realizing the nature of the quest did Frodo accept the burden of his mission. Indeed, the elves destroyed their own polity in pursuit of a humane duty. This did not happen merely as an unfortunate damage of war. It was known by them to be an inevitable result of victory, which could in no way be advantageous to elves. Elrond cannot be said to have had a political duty or purpose. So you can see there that there is this idea that the elves actually sacrifice their own polity, their own people, their own political interest as part of the story. And so if you're going to read it like this, then yeah, if you're going to read the elves as a representation of white Europeans in the 21st century, then and this is a political manual, then yes, it's subverting. But that's definitely not what Tolkien's saying. He's saying that actually this story exists on another plane from the political, and a character like Denethor is mistaken in thinking that Sauron, Saruman, King Theoden, they're all just actors in a political game. Rather, we have a battle between good and evil. We have and he kind of goes into this in his essay on Beowulf. When we look at the character of Grendel in the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, well, he's a troll. He's a man-eating monster. He's not just against this group of men or that group of men. He is an enemy to all men, and thus he represents something which is antagonistic to all men. Things like time, suffering, death. He is not a stand-in for a political faction. And by representation, I don't mean it's a one-to-one. It's rather there are ideas bound up with that. There are kind of values bound up with that, with his character, which pit him against all that's human, all that's civilization. He's the enemy of humanity at large. And Sauron is a similar threat. He isn't just against the Gondorians or against Rohan. He wants to enslave the whole world and make it a tool for his will. He wants to reduce everything to his horrific vision, and all that oppose him, he wants to maliciously torture. This isn't just a political enemy. This is a spiritual war, you might say. But that doesn't do it justice, right? It's just it's an absolute war, you might say. And so when we're looking at the actions of the elves, sacrificing their own polity to destroy evil, that's a different order of magnitude than discussing how white Europeans should act today. Like that's a different level, or it might not be. I do think there are questions surrounding how we frame the political. We're too often focused in on purely the material politic and not the more fundamental, maybe metaphysical war that's going on. But nonetheless, this is operating on a different level than this person, cat girl Kulak, is at all. They've completely misunderstood um, the kind of conversation here. But be that as it may, we can go further, right? And it's already been pointed out in the chat. The idea that the heroes don't use power is nonsense. Throughout the story, it's the heroes in the Lord of the Rings are actively working against Sauron. They don't just passively wait for him to conquer them. They don't just passively wait for the end of the world, right? They're not just hoping that he's defeated. The whole thing at the Council of Elrond is they debate the different options before them. One of the options that they consider is hiding the ring or throwing it away and just hoping that it's never found. This is essentially the wait and see, we'll maybe be able to last it out approach. They don't do that. They recognize this can't be done, that Sauron must be dealt with if they are to survive. And not only that, it is their duty to try and stop him. It is their duty because they are in that time and they have a responsibility to face the evil before them. And so they then debate, well, can we use the ring? Well, no, we can't use the ring because firstly, it is kind of Sauron's essence within this machine, and that's how Tolkien describes it. It's a machine-like thing. It's a tool that he uses to enslave other people to his will. And so intrinsic to any use of the ring is this desire to dominate others. And I mean, I've spoken about this elsewhere on the channel. I don't want to kind of get sidetracked into Tolkien's anarchic views, but he definitely feels that all beings, human, animal, plant life, has a dignity, has an integrity to it that deserves respect and should be treated as such, should be recognized as such. So to dominate others is to violate something special to all created beings. So we can't use the ring because it's going to corrupt us too. So the only option is to destroy it, and that will end Sauron. And so Frodo takes up this quest, knowing that this is the best way to resist Sauron. But along the journey, while Frodo and Samwise are going off on this secret mission to destroy Sauron's power, the other characters like Aragorn and Gandalf, Legolas and Gimli, King Theoden, are engaged in military action. While Frodo and Sam are off basically doing subterfuge and espionage, essentially, there is still a war to be fought. The humans, the dwarves, the elves, they all need to survive. Otherwise, there's no point, right? So they have to fight because the orcs are coming. And so we see battles at Helm's Deep, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Finally, to help Frodo and Sam get to Mount Doom, on the off chance that they have the opportunity, Aragorn leads the remnants of his forces to Mordor and fights Sauron's armies at the Black Gate, draws them out so that the way is clear for Frodo. The idea that there's no use of power here is not true. But more than that, the way Tolkien kind of frames these battles and military action is heavily indebted to what he describes as northern heroic spirit or northern courage. And he sees this as being at the heart of Norse mythology and Anglo-Saxon poetry. To set the scene, and this is Tolkien's interpretation, take something like Ragnarok, the kind of climax of the Norse sagas. What we have here is a dualistic world. We have the gods led by Odin, or in the Germanic tradition, Wotan or Woden, and they are at war with the giants, i.e. the Jotnar, and the monsters of the world, the world serpent, Fenrir the wolf. To help them, the gods have recruited to their cause the heroes of mankind, the great warriors who, chosen, die in battle and are brought to Odin's hall, Valhalla, where they feast, they drink, they fight, and they prepare for the final battle. And so, at the twilight of the gods, the two sides come together for a final showdown. The gods and heroes on one side, the giants and the monsters on the other. And what makes the Norse vision distinctive is that Odin knows that the gods will lose. The monsters will win. It has been foretold. It is fated. It has been prophesied. He cannot alter this fate. And yet, he does not just lie down. He doesn't just wait for the world to end. He doesn't just fade away into the west, as Catgirl Kulak might put it. As I should note, he does in Wagner's Ring Cycle. So, again, something that's really missing in this interpretation. No, in the Volupsa, Odin fights. He fights even though he knows he's going to lose. And that is the real courageous moment for Tolkien. This is at the heart of the northern pagan psyche. It's this idea that you fight on, you show heroism, you do not yield your ground. You fight to the death, even though you know you're going to lose. And this idea is repeated in the Anglo-Saxon poem, The Battle of Maldon. The Saxon warriors, due to the mismanagement of their leader, Berthwald, are in a perilous situation. They've been surrounded by Vikings, and the bodyguard know they are going to die. But nonetheless, they don't run like some of the others. They stay and fight. They fight to the bitter end. And not only that, they grow in strength and boldness. There's this famous bit where one of the bodyguards gets up and says something to the effect of, let me see if I can find it actually, rather than paraphrasing it, because it's just one of those great moments in Old English literature. One second, folks. Britwald grasped his shield and spoke. He was an old companion. He brandished his ash spear and most boldly urged on the warriors. Mind must be the firmer, heart the more fierce, courage the greater as our strength diminishes. Here lies our leader hewn down, an heroic man in the dust. He who now longs to escape will lament forever. I am old. I will not go from here, but I mean to lie by the side of my lord, lie in the dust with the man I loved so dearly. This is northern heroic spirit for Tolkien, and it is particularly praiseworthy, not only when it's in a kind of an impossible situation where defeat looks inevitable, but if it's a servant or a soldier following orders who shows it. Because they're not making the decision, they're just showing blind obedience and yet still having that courage. So somebody like Samwise Gamgee in The Lord of the Rings, who Though in the film, he's kind of made out to be like Frodo's best friend, in the book, he's very much a master and a servant relationship. And so his unflinching obedience and bravery, his willingness to like go into Cirith Ungol by himself out of love for his master, kind of unconditional service, that's the heart of Northern heroic courage for Tolkien, or the very best version of it, because it's not for his own glory; it's out of duty, right? Whereas somebody who's in a leadership position or a hero like Beowulf, it kind of gets tinged with the pursuit for glory for him, and so they put themselves in more dangerous circumstances to kind of generate this virtue. So, for example, Beowulf chooses to fight the dragon without his bodyguard, and Tolkien says, "Well, that actually wasn't a good decision because he was mortally wounded in the process, and this led to the destruction of his people." So he was pursuing the virtue of Northern heroic courage for his own glory, rather than out of duty or circumstance. It's kind of making an artificial way of having it. But nonetheless, that's an aside. This kind of set of values is clearly within the Lord of the Rings. Every battle is primarily defensive in nature. The Battle of Helm's Deep, the Kingdom of Rohan, which is very clearly inspired by the Anglo-Saxons. The people of Rohan are surrounded. The army is pushed back to this fortress and has to defend itself against overwhelming odds, against Uruk-hai, who look like they're going to destroy them. And towards the end of the battle, it looks like all is lost. Theoden and his men rally for one last heroic, defiant charge and pour forth into the Uruk-hai. Let me see if I can actually get the words Theoden says before they charge in, because it's one of those great moments. I think the film actually does a really good job of it. But he says something to the same effect in the books. The end will not be long, said King Theoden, but I will not end here, taken like an old badger in a trap. Snowmane and Hasufel and the horses of my guard are in the inner court. When dawn comes, I will bid men sound Helm's horn, and I will ride forth. Will you ride with me then, son of Arathorn? Maybe we shall cleave a road, or make such an end as will be worth a song, if any be left to sing of us hereafter. I will ride with you, said Aragorn. And then later they ride forth, and King Theoden, it appears to the men that follow him that it's like Helm Hammerhand has come back. The ancient heroes from the past, the Rohirrim's legends, have been brought into reality by this old king charging into these monsters. And then again, this happens again at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Again, it looks like the forces of Mordor are going to destroy those of Gondor. And King Theoden brings his troops down to the Pelennor Fields to relieve the Gondorians. But nonetheless, it looks hopeless. The forces of Mordor are much larger and stronger than the Rohirrim. So it looks like they're all going to die. And he says the following again. And in some ways, I think the film augments this, but let's go with this for the moment. At that sound, the bent shape of the king sprang suddenly erect. Tall and proud he seemed again, and rising in his stirrups, he cried in a loud voice, more clear than any there had ever heard a mortal man achieve before. Arise, arise, riders of Theoden. Fell deeds awake, fire and slaughter. Spears shall be shaken, shield to be splintered, a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride now, ride to Gondor. And in the film, this gets there's a bit that's added there where he starts shouting death, and all the Rohirrim join in. And it, to me, it's my favorite moment in The Return of the King. Just this cry of death. We're going to charge in, we're going to die, but we're going to give our best. We're going to fight against the foes of Mordor with everything we've got. This idea that Tolkien's work subverts the ethnos by telling a story about how Europeans shouldn't defend themselves with power, it doesn't compute with this at all. If anything, it's the opposite. It's saying even if it's hopeless, we should fight. We should resist with everything we've got. But I can't read King Theoden as a passive man who lets the Uruk-hai destroy his people. He doesn't. He gives everything, even though it looks impossible. So I think that's a really that in itself would refute this tweet, but we can add a bit more to it, and more to this discussion, because Tolkien's presentation of Northern heroic courage doesn't stop there. It's part of a broader story he's trying to tell, and in some ways goes beyond the kind of pagan worldview that he's building on into a Christian perspective. And this was really emphasized by a tweet that was in response to this one. And I'm going to bring it up now, because I thought it did a really good job of kind of bringing it very clearly to the point across. So this was by, now I'm going to say this very badly, Alighieri Amuru. I apologize for that pronunciation. He's a good lad. He's a Catholic on here, and yeah, I would recommend you follow him. He's a really good. He or she, I should say, I don't know, but they are a very good commentator, and I really enjoy their tweets. But they replied. And I should say, Walrus from the Longhouse put me onto this tweet. Bro, even using power, European pagan myths were all about fading into history. The Wanderer, Beowulf, Ragnarok, it's all about fighting a losing battle. We've just said that. And maybe just to build on that point for a moment, it's not just that Northern Courage isn't just a response to losing one battle, like the Battle of Maldon. The Anglo-Saxon and Norse view is that everything comes to an end, even the reign of the gods, right? The gods couldn't resist forever the forces of the monsters. The monsters, the demons, time, suffering, death, they're all trying to break in, and we can resist for a while, but eventually they overcome us all. And this is the Saxon view. The poem, The Wanderer, it's about this man who's remembering a kingdom he used to be a part of, where the gold flowed. People lived in merriment in the halls. They sang and drank together. But that's all gone now. It's been destroyed. And he has no home to go to. He just has to wander the icy frozen wastes. The poem Beowulf, the great hero who slayed Grendel, is himself killed in battle with a dragon, leading to the destruction of the people who he ruled over. The Saxons deeply internalized this truth that both as their own lives and the life of their people, it was frail, it's limited, it comes to an end. They were living in the ruins of the Romans, these ghost towns like London, which had been abandoned, built with stone that the Saxons couldn't build with themselves for hundreds of years. They saw these ruins. They knew that civilizations died. They knew people died, that everything is temporary and in flux. And so northern heroic courage isn't just a predisposition for times of battle. It, in a way, it's how we ought to live our whole lives against this constant, chaotic, entropic attack upon humanity and civilization. But our friend here goes on. What Tolkien did was he turned this fatality into hope. He sanctified the pagan myths, incorporated into the great tapestry. Oh wait, do I need to click it? No, that's the end of that tweet. So, wait, I thought there was more. Anyway, so what he's referring to here is the narrative motif of eucatastrophe, which appears in particularly in the Lord of the Rings, but also in Tolkien's other works. Tolkien kind of described this idea that he had in his essay on fairy stories. And I'd encourage you to go and read that if you get the chance. But he says that this is really at the heart of any good fairy story, and it's that which brings about the consolation of a happy ending. It's the idea that you have a situation which looks terrible. It looks like the heroes are going to be defeated, doom is inevitable, and thus it makes us feel fear and despair. It looks like a tragedy is about to happen. So the men of Rohan are about to be killed by the Uruk-hai, or Frodo at Mount Doom. He has the opportunity to destroy the ring, and he eventually is broken by its power and takes the ring for himself. Right. So these are moments of real defeat. Looks like it's on the table. Evil has won. But then, unexpectedly, help arrives, and the day is won. Defeat turns to victory. We might say it's a good catastrophe, or a eucatastrophe takes place. So in the case of Helm's Deep, Gandalf with Erkenbrand and the Knights of Rohan arrive in time, and so they are able to overcome the forces of Isengard. And in addition, unforeseen by these people, the Ents have been roused to anger, and so have marched on Isengard itself. So there's a kind of double eucatastrophe here. At the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, not only does Theoden and the Rohirrim turn up, but then later Aragorn and the Grey Company, or in the film Aragorn and the Army of the Dead, arrive in time to save the defenders and overturn the battle, winning it for good. Or in the case of Frodo, Gollum appears, and he is possessed with lust for the ring. He attacks Frodo, takes it for himself, but unintentionally slips off the edge of the kind of platform into the fires below, and the ring is destroyed. This is a eucatastrophe, and in Tolkien's view, all of these events have been kind of providentially ordered. It's not like there's a puppet master who's overriding people's wills. No, through the ordering of people's free actions, such as Gollum, this power, this what Gandalf refers to this as this other power, which is working for good in the world against Sauron. It's kind of working through these things to bring about the victory of good over evil through these eucatastrophes, both highlighting the limitations of men to achieve it by themselves. They need help from others, but also bringing glory to the divine, you might say. And this eucatastrophe model is obviously a redemption of heroic courage, right? It presupposes the point of where defeat is inevitable, thus giving the opportunity for northern heroic courage to be displayed, but then rewards it with an unforeseen victory. And this is very much building upon Tolkien's understanding and faith in Christianity. In his essay, he identifies this as being the key motif within the Christian story, that humanity as a whole is well is guilty of sin and thus faces the punishment of death and damnation. And so we are in an impossible situation. It looks like we might say humanity will be defeated, things are going to end terribly for us. But through Jesus Christ, through his incarnation, there is redemption offered. The redemption of human nature, the removal of sin from it. And in turn, when Christ himself is crucified and it looks like his mission is being defeated, he is then resurrected. The eucatastrophe of the incarnation. So there's a kind of double eucatastrophe, the gift of Christ himself, which and the resurrection, both of which lead to the redemption of humanity. And so this kind of pattern then redeems these impossible situations through divine grace. Right, and so the Lord of the Rings, through its repeated eucatastrophes, is mirroring for Tolkien the fundamental story at the heart of reality. And so we could say, well, this is a departure from, the pagan Ragnarok, for example. The heroes aren't defeated in the Christian story, or at least they would be defeated, but for Christ. And so Christ is the kind of additional element here, which gives hope for redemption, for victory. Whereas in, your Ragnarok, there isn't that hope. I would kind of attenuate this because I think something Tolkien doesn't talk about, but I think is important, is the fact that, okay, at Ragnarok, Odin is going to be defeated. However, that doesn't mean it's the end of the gods. So his son, and Odin's son's name escapes me. Not Baldur, Vidar or Vidar. He's going to slay Fenrir, the wolf who kills Odin, and then the world will be destroyed. It will be set on fire. Valhalla will be destroyed in fire. It will be subsumed into the waters. But then a new world will rise up, and Vidar and the sons of Thor are kind of going to govern over this world. So there's going to be a new world, a new beginning. Now, some have said, well, this is cyclical. Maybe it's the start of the cycle. I'm not terribly convinced by that. I don't think the Volupsa kind of lends itself to that. It seems more like after the destruction of Ragnarok, there is a new world, and it's going to continue in that way. But there is a sense of a new beginning, right? And this is part of the Norse kind of mythos, and Tolkien doesn't really include it in his analysis. He only sees the kind of dying or resisting against a powerful foe, fighting even though death is inevitable, and then dying. So the kind of fatalistic doom. But of course, if Wotan knows that he's going to die, he also knows that this is going to bring about the rebirth of the world. So he has reason to hope beyond himself. So maybe it's overstating it somewhat, but nonetheless, it does seem like there is a distinction here, because a rebirth is not the same as a redemption. It's not the same as an overcoming. If it is truly cyclical, then the monsters will rise up again and will defeat the gods again, and then we'll have another rebirth. It almost sounds a bit like a Dark Souls game. Whereas in Christianity, the eucatastrophe is final. Christ has won. He's defeated sin and death, and so there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and there will be paradise. And this paradise won't just be a reiteration of the Garden of Eden. It's going to be something even better, made possible by the process of redemption. That's not really there in the Volupsa. It's not there in the Norse sagas. It's not there in Saxon poetry. So there is a kind of stronger cause for hope, you might say. Hope in the future, an optimism of real decisive change in the story. And perhaps this is reflected in Saxon kind of conversions to Christianity. There is in the Ecclesiastical History of the English People by Bede, the Anglo-Saxon Christian monk. He records the how King Edwin of Northumbria was converted by Paulinus, and it consisted in his presentation in a series of conversations between Paulinus, the king, and his advisors. And one of his advisors seems to have said the following: "It seems to me thus, dearest king, that this present life of men on earth, in comparison to the time that is unknown to us, is as if you were sitting at your dinner tables with your noblemen, warmed in the hall, and it rained and it snowed and it hailed, and one sparrow came from outside and quickly flew through the hall, and it came in through one door and went out through the other door. Lo, during the time that he was inside, he was not touched by the storm of the winter. But that is the blink of an eye and the least amount of time. But he immediately comes from winter into winter again. So then this life of men appears for a short amount of time. What came before or what follows after, we do not know. Therefore, if this new law brings anything more certain and more wise, it is worthy of that we follow it." Now, of course, this was written by a Christian. It's impossible to verify, but it does seem like there is a possibility that this sort of logic would have persuaded many Anglo-Saxons to convert to Christianity, at least King Edwin and his court. That given the fleeting nature of life, the limitation of life, everything ends, the eventual prospect of defeat and destruction, if then there's a religion that promises, even if you're defeated, temporarily defeated, even if you die, that there is redemption, that would be very appealing. So there is perhaps something quite deep in what Tolkien's doing, tapping into the very roots of how Christianity came to be within Britain, or the British Isles, I should say. So in that respect, then, you could see it as departing or subverting paganism. But I would rather, I think it's more, it's responding to the kind of fatalistic doom he perceives within Anglo-Saxon literature. It really it takes on board the tragic nature of the world as represented in the Norse sagas, but then responds to it with a Christian answer, or rather builds upon it, incorporates it into a Christian story. But let's kind of move on from this point to, let me stop sharing, to kind of two further things, or a further thing here. Because if we go back to the original tweet, talks about fading away into the West, and primarily I've been speaking about the the men responding to the dangers of Sauron. That this is how the Rohirrim, or the Gondorians, fight back against Mordor. It is they which show the most northern heroic courage. But of course, the characters that Catgirl Kulak talks about fading away into the West. This isn't what the Gondorians or Rohirrim do, but it is the kind of storyline of the elves. And he goes in quite hard on Galadriel, for example, for not using the Ring of Power for herself and for her people. And we could even intensify this. As we were talking about earlier, Tolkien explicitly says the elves knowingly destroyed their polity for the sake of destroying the ring. They knew that the destruction of the ring would end their people, and they thought it was better to do that than to linger on. This is because their power was bound up with the One Ring. The three Elvish rings, though not created by Sauron, in a sense tapped into that power, into that magic. And so So when his ring was destroyed, their power was lost to maintain these illusory utopias, we might say. So what's that about? Is that is that worthy of condemnation? Well, again, Tolkien's not trying to make political points here. He's speaking to something much deeper. He's addressing us on a metaphysical level as humans in a kind of mythic realm. It's almost like it's like trying to read Oedipus Rex as a commentary on politics for today. As in like, oh, okay, I'm going to read this great text by Sophocles and analyze it for strategy for defeating Joe Biden. Like that's not what that text is about. It's about human being, and in a sense, we might say the abstract Greek hero in relation to tragedy and dealing with that outside of the political sphere, outside of the concrete in a way. Though there are kind of references to the political of that time period, it's dealing with something more fundamental that translates across political spaces. And it's the same here with the elves, because Tolkien makes a couple of points here in his essay on fairy stories, which I think are relevant. First, when we talk about fairy, well, fairy was a French word which became in England synonymous with elf. So already we're getting a connection between a fairy story, which isn't just about fairies; it's about the magical world fairies inhabit, and elves. Now, of course, this is a wide category, and something like let me show you it. It'll be better to show you this. I came across this today, actually. Don't ask me why. I get very distracted by these sorts of things. But it's a book by Brian Froud and Alan Lee, who are two English artists. It's from the 1980s, I want to say. Let's see. 1978, so 2 years before. And it's a book called Fairies. It was apparently a bestseller at the time. It sold like 5 million copies or something like that. So it's done pretty well for a book of illustrations, and it's a study of fairies in folklore. I've really enjoyed looking at it. It's visually a treat, but also it's it has a lot of information about different kinds of fairy and elf and so on. I'll just give you a kind of taster of what it looks like. I would recommend that you go and check it out after this, because I've never come across a book that's kind of presented in this way. And of course, Alan Lee went on to be an illustrator for the Lord of the Rings, and on the films, he was one of the concept designers for the films. So a lot of the aesthetic goes back to Alan Lee. So we've got a nice connection here with the fairies. But what you'll find in this book is that fairy or elf is both like a specific category for like one kind of species, but also can be used in a broad sense to incorporate a whole range of beings. So we might think of pixies or leprechauns, goblins and bogles, vampiric nymphs, so on and so forth. There's a whole range of beings that fit within the category of fairy or elf. It's not just the pretty little ladies with wings, although they're part of it. I mean, just look at Jenny Greenteeth. She is practically Gollum here, or this lovely monstrosity, these water-dwelling women who seek to drown children. So it's I mean, this comes under the fairy. But yes, so I think we have a broad concept here, and the Lord of the Rings is very much in that tradition. Hobbits, dwarves, and elves are all within the fairy. So that gives us a bit of context. The elves themselves, or the fairy, for Tolkien, they're not supernatural. This is a mistake we often make. We think because they're magical, they're therefore part of the divine world or on another plane from us. And certainly they are distinct from the mundane or have greater powers than we do. But if we look at Tolkien's kind of use of magic, it's not like Harry Potter where you learn spells, and it's not like a divine power coming in. It's more like natural abilities that people have. So Gandalf's just able to do something, or the Ents that just naturally talk, etc., etc. And in a way, that's how he sees elves or fairies. They are, in a way, more part of nature than we are. They are bound up with the natural world. They belong to its wildness and arbitrariness. And their ambivalent power, which can both be good for us, i.e., healing us, benefiting us, but is also very dangerous, such as cursing us, giving us a disease, transforming us into a frog, kidnapping us. This is the dark, dangerous side of them and of nature. And indeed, this is reflected in the creation story of Middle Earth, found within the Ainul Dale, which has been compiled by Christopher Tolkien into the um, Silmarillion. The elves are part of the natural world and are bound up with its kind of fate, with the rules or laws which govern it. They cannot escape what's called the music of the Ainur. That is the kind of plan which the angelic beings put together, or the kind of model from which Middle Earth and its history is built. They are bound up with that story. Whereas men are distinct. They have free will, and so are not bound to the music of the Ainur. They are not bound to the laws of nature in the same way. And by laws of nature, I don't just mean kind of physical laws. I mean the laws of history, as it were. So they have more power to shape their destinies. Now, there's been some debate about whether this actually plays out in the Lord of the Rings or in the Silmarillion. But let's just take Tolkien at his word here. This is how he at least wants to conceive of the distinction between elves and men. And perhaps this is also tied into the fact that elves are immortal, whereas men can die. And even those elves who die, say in battle, we know what happens to them. They are taken to the halls of Mandos. So we know that in the next life, what's going to happen to the elves. Whereas men, all that's known is, in some sense, they proceed from outside the bounds of Middle Earth. Their souls, who knows where they go? It's kind of outside of the paradigm, outside of our comprehension within this world. They go to somewhere beyond it or outside of it. Actually, Sagittarius Granorum has just put this in the chat. So I'm going to share this. The elders' actions have to do with the unique way their fear or souls are bound up with Arda, whereas the fear of men is only a visitor to Arda. This is part of Iluvatar's gift to men. So men are, in some ways, distinct from the natural order in a way that the elves are not. This then comes round, I think, to later in his essay on fairy stories, where he talks about the different benefits of fairy stories. One of them that we've been already discussed is constellation, the overwhelming joy we feel when we are moved by a eucatastrophe, when we go from that despair of the impending doom and defeat of our heroes to their victorious rescue, we are overwhelmed with delight. We're ecstatic. We're really it's a really powerful and moving experience. And that is one of the key kind of gifts of a fairy story. Another is escape. And Tolkien uses this word in a couple of ways. One, but by escape, he doesn't mean just kind of running away from reality. He means a kind of, um, well, a couple of things. One is an escape from modernity. In his view, the robot age we live in is ugly. It's filled with bad things, and essentially we're developing better ways to exploit and kill other people. We're creating machines which allow us to destroy the environment, to coerce others to do our will, and if they won't do our will, to kill them in more excruciating and awful ways, and at greater numbers. Is this supposed to be a good age? um, and we can see the wickedness of this technological age in the ugliness of our tools, of our buildings, of our way of life. And so, quite rightfully, Tolkien says, well, who wouldn't want to escape from that? At least in the fairy story, we're presented with real living things which have a beauty to them. They're not always good, but there's a certain charm and magic to them. We feel it. We feel more fully alive when we engage with Middle Earth than we do with our local high street. We feel this sense of wonder and awe and real an energetic source when we engage with the Lord of the Rings compared to this technological hellscape we inhabit. So, of course, we want to escape from that. But there's a more profound sense of escape in fairy story. Because that would imply that fairy stories are only relevant today, but actually, mythic and fantastical tales go back thousands of years. And Tolkien says the following. Let's see. There are also other and more profound escapisms that have always appeared in fairy tale and legend. There are other things more grim and terrible to fly from than the noise, stench, ruthlessness, and extravagance of the internal combustion engine. There are hunger, thirst, poverty, pain, sorrow, injustice, and death. And even when men are not facing hard things such as these, there are ancient limitations from which fairy stories offer a sort of escape, and old ambitions and desires, touching the very roots of fantasy, to which they offer a kind of satisfaction and consolation. Some are pardonable weaknesses or curiosities, such as the desire to visit, free as a fish, the deep sea, or the longing for the noiseless, gracious, economical flight of a bird, that longing which the aeroplane cheats, except in rare moments, seen high and by wind and distance noiseless, turning in the sun, precisely when imagined and not used. There are profounder wishes, such as the desire to converse with other living things. On this desire, as ancient as the fall, is largely founded the talking of beasts and creatures in fairy tales, and especially the magical understanding of their proper speech. This is the root, and not the confusion attributed to the minds of men of the unrecorded past, an alleged absence of the sense of separation of ourselves from beasts. A vivid sense of that separation is very ancient, but also a sense that it was a severance, a strange fate, and a guilt lies on us. Other creatures are like other realms with which man has broken off relations and sees now only from the outside at a distance, being at war with them or on the terms of an uneasy armistice. There are a few men who are privileged to travel abroad a little Others must be content with travellers' tales. There's actually a note here. It's saying we should look at. The absence of this sense is a mere hypothesis concerning men of the lost past. Whatever wild confusions men of today, degraded or deluded, may suffer, it is just as legitimate an hypothesis, and one more in agreement with what little is recorded concerning the thoughts of men of old on this subject, that this sense was once stronger. That fantasies which blended the human form with animal and vegetable forms, or gave human faculties to beasts, are ancient is, of course, no evidence for confusion at all. It is, if anything, evidence to the contrary. Fantasy does not blur the sharp outlines of the real world, for it depends on them. As far as our Western European world is concerned, this sense of separation has in fact been attacked and weakened in modern times, not by fantasy, but by scientific theory. Not by stories of centaurs or werewolves or enchanted bears, but by the hypotheses, or dogmatic guesses, of scientific writers who classed man not only as an animal, that correct classification is ancient, but as only an animal. There has been a consequent distortion of sentiment. The natural love of men not wholly corrupt for beasts, and the human desire to get inside the skin of living things has run riot. We now get men who love animals more than men, who pity sheep so much that they curse shepherds as wolves, who weep over a slain war horse and vilify dead soldiers. It is now, not in the days when fairy stories were begotten, that we get an absence of the sense of separation. That's quite an interesting point there. I hadn't read that before. And you can definitely see that in our society. The number of people I've met who have more affection for, say, dogs or cats or other animals, but hate humanity is palpable. And I think Tolkien's definitely clocked onto something there, that it actually comes from a lack of sense of the distinction between the human and the animal, that there is a solemn divide between us, which goes back to our very ancient days, as Tolkien says, to the time of the fall, which of course involved a serpent talking to Adam and Eve. And I wonder if Tolkien then is drawing upon this idea with the fading of the elves. One of the things he says in the beginning of The Hobbit, for example, is that hobbits, though they exist in the world today, have reduced in numbers, and because of the kind of boorishness of men, our kind of rudeness and clumsiness and general kind of awfulness, hobbits have hidden themselves away. In the same way, the elves, they belong to the natural world. They belong to the world of talking beasts and talking trees like the Ents. And the Lord of the Rings very much gives us that chance to explore what it's like to be a tree, for example. But that world is in our ancient past. And in the Lord of the Rings, this kind of shift is represented in the fact that the age of men has come with the defeat of Sauron. It is the time for men to rule Middle-earth, and thus for the magical, the natural, to recede. And this represents this division between man and beast, man and tree. So Tolkien's not just kind of having the elves leave as a political point or a political strategy. It's actually trying to clock on to something in our own experience, that with the victory over evil, with the rise of humanity, we see this sharpening division between us and nature, between us and the fairy, between us and the elf. And so they, in a sense, must physically leave Middle-earth to represent this, or to kind of embody this truth. So again, and then also with the consequent decline in magic as part of that. And it's not just a narrative of disenchantment. This seems to be something which Tolkien's saying we have felt for aeons, this division between us and the elf or the animal. So again, I don't think this is a fair interpretation of Tolkien being given by the tweet, and it fundamentally misses a an appreciation of Celtic mythology, which actually really wrestles with it and takes seriously what it's doing. But be that as it may, let's then maybe take a different tack, because I want to kind of address one final point here, um, on this tweet, um, because I don't think it's the strongest kind of attack or way of putting the point. We've already kind of discussed how Tolkien takes the Northern heroic courage and rather than seeing it end in doom, gives it a kind of redemption, right? But as a consequence, he annihilates the place of death in many ways. There, of course, characters die, like Boromir, King Theoden, who is the most clear representation or figure belonging to this kind of northern paganism. He is Odin at Ragnarok. But in the main, most of the heroes survive the quest. And those who do need to pass on don't die. They pass away into the west, like Frodo. He goes on the ship to the Grey Havens, and so did Bilbo as well. In the Lord of the Rings, it's a happy ending. There isn't tragic in tone. It is a eucatastrophe. And so Tolkien kind of, in the Lord of the Rings at least, limits the place of death, of the tragic within his tale. This is a point actually that I mentioned a while back in another attack on Tolkien, this by a fellow called Michael Moorcock, who is the author of several fantasy and science fiction stories, including Elric of Melniboné series. That's probably what he's most famous for. He also introduced the idea of the multiverse, which I think is pretty cool. And he's more than Tolkien. I think Moorcock's had a bigger influence on modern fantasy than Tolkien in many ways, at least in its ethos. And he does not have much love for Tolkien. He really hates the Lord of the Rings. I did a stream on this and really pushed back on a lot of what Moorcock says. But he does have to make this point here, and I think it kind of gets to this. So Tolkien says in On Fairy Stories that the oldest and deepest desire, the great escape, is the escape from death. Fairy stories provide many examples and modes of this, which might be called the genuine escapist or fugitive spirit, but so do other stories and so do other studies. But the consolation of fairy stories has another aspect than the imaginative satisfaction of ancient desires. Far more important is the consolation of a happy ending, which we've spoken about. Moorcock says, the great epics dignified death, but they did not ignore it. And it is one of the reasons why they are superior to the artificial romances of which Lord of the Rings is merely one of the most recent. And when I was thinking about it, I've thought about this in the past. And he has a point here. Because let's take something like Homer's Iliad. What is the Iliad? It is a war between two great peoples, two great civilizations, the Greeks, the Achaeans, and the Trojans. And it surmounts in the deaths of many great heroes, such as Achilles and Hector, the destruction of an entire noble civilization in Troy. Those who survive are exiled and scattered around the world, such as Aeneas. On the other hand, the Greeks don't fare much better. Agamemnon, the king, because of his actions, will eventually end up murdered by his wife. Only a couple, like Odysseus, really survive and to tell the tale. It's a tragedy of the highest order. And then if we actually look at Greek tragedy, we have Oedipus, this noble figure who, having slain the Sphinx and freed the people of Thebes, is himself brought down, but unintentionally by his actions, by murdering his father in ignorance, sleeping with his mother in ignorance, and he is brought low into shame. He blinds himself out of just pure kind of absurd madness at what's happened, and is forced to, by himself more than anything, into exile. It's a terrible, terrible, gut-wrenching story that hits at the kind of what Nietzsche described as the kind of Dionysian truth, that in a way it'd be better to never have lived. That is the kind of Dionysian poignant truth within all the ecstatic mad laughter. Let's move forward. Well, we've already been discussing the Saxon and Norse temperament, this idea, this perception that the gods will be defeated by the monsters. Mighty heroes like Beowulf will be brought low. Men will be defeated by their enemies. The great hall will be destroyed, and we will wander in the ruins. Later on, the tale of King Arthur. From the time of Geoffrey of Monmouth, when the tradition as we know it really gets going, with his writing the history of the kings of Britain, we see from that time onwards this idea that Arthur's empire, and it is an empire in for Geoffrey, it spans not just the British Isles but most of continental Europe. It's essentially Christendom, or Charlemagne's empire, but for the Brits. Well, that is destroyed within his lifetime. His own nephew rebels against him, kidnaps or runs away with his wife. It's not totally clear. Maybe a bit like Helen of Troy and Paris. But they disappear. You know, they rebel against Arthur. He must come back to Britain to reclaim his crown. He kills his nephew, but is himself mortally wounded, and is taken to the Isle of Avalon to rest in slumber until the time is right for him to return. But as a consequence, his lineage is ended, his empire disintegrates, Britain is once more thrown into anarchy and rebellion and tyranny and wickedness. That golden moment which he achieved, a just kingdom, that only lasts a short time, and then it ends in tragedy. And there are many, many tales which we could reference that have that same temperament, you might say. Whereas Tolkien's tale, at least The Lord of the Rings, and I would argue the meta-narrative or the main narrative of the older tales has the same eucatastrophe focus. And so a noble death, or the kind of centrality of these things all come to an end, is somewhat lost, because there is always a providential power ordering things towards redemption, towards a better world, towards a world that overcomes this. To some extent, I can see Moorcock's point, and I think it is potentially a narrative weakness, because there's something very compelling about these stories I've just described. It captures something very powerful within all of our lives, which is the reality of death at its most profound, that it comes for us all and we must face it head on. And that doesn't just include us, but our civilizations. But nonetheless, I don't think this is a total undermining of The Lord of the Rings, but it is potentially a stronger point that, a pagan might say Tolkien has kind of rejected this perennial idea across pagan cultures in adopting a Christian story or reframing it in a Christian way. And so metaphysically, it's in some sense denying tragedy, or that tragedy is the heart of reality. As Nietzsche would argue, it's the will to the will to live, the will to power, is a struggle against the inevitability of death, right? And for Schopenhauer, we should resign ourselves. For Nietzsche, we should struggle on. He's much more of that kind of northern courage, you might say, although that's very, very much simplifying Nietzsche. Whereas Tolkien's saying, no, that isn't the heart of reality. The heart of reality is divine grace. So I think that would be maybe a stronger point of division. There are other kind of things going on which maybe are worthy of discussion. One might be, so for Tolkien, he thinks that the pagan stories primarily deal with temporary enemies. So it's the gods v monsters. It's a physical battle, right? That's the case in Ragnarok. Then in the kind of initial stages of conversion, the Saxons retain this idea. So it's no longer the gods v the monsters. It's God and men versus Satan and his spawn. So like Grendel and the dragon are demonic beings now. But there is a subtle change because although we keep this dualism and it is a physical battle, the fact that Christ has won over death means that even if you die to Grendel, it's not the ultimate defeat, because eventually God's going to right all the wrongs. So implicit is this idea that the actual battle is spiritual. It's whether you're going to heaven or hell, whether you're on God's side or the devil's side. And in Christian medieval literature, or the medieval tales, move towards this, so that by the time you get to something like the Quest of the Holy Grail, or Parsifal, I should say, by Chrétien de Troyes, these stories are not so much about overcoming a physical obstacle, as they are in like Beowulf or Ragnarok, as with wrestling with a kind of moral or spiritual obstacle. Did I do the right thing? Do I have the right attitude to attain the Grail? Do I have the right virtues? And so on and so forth. The main foe is the devil, not as a physical threat, but as a tempter, taking you away from being a soldier of Christ to becoming a warrior of hell. So this becomes the focus, and you can see both of these in the Lord of the Rings. A lot of it is, as I've been describing, a physical war. Aragorn being kind of the leader of that, of the peoples of the West against the orcs of Mordor. And this takes up a large part of it. But actually, the primary kind of antagonist within the book isn't a physical threat. It's not the orcs or the Balrogs or the cave troll. It's the ring. It's the temptation the ring poses. The prospect of absolute power to do whatever you want, and the corrupting influence of that. That is the main enemy in the story, and many characters fall to it or resist with all their might, and eventually it even crushes Frodo, who Tolkien describes as being the strongest anybody could be in that situation. It's so he's blending these two things together. What he sees as a more pagan story and a Christian story, or a medieval Christian story. And he brings the two together in The Lord of the Rings in quite a unique way. So, and I do feel there is sometimes a tension between these two. What is the main battle here? Does it devalue one if the other is privileged? But yes, so I think that is a good place maybe to kind of bring this discussion of Catgirl Kulak's tweet to a close. I think it's been fruitful, and it's given us a deeper appreciation of what Tolkien was doing, some of the ideas he was wrestling with and playing with, and maybe some of the ways in which he does engage with pagan and Christian ideas, how he maybe responds to maybe the challenge paganism put forward, and the way maybe some of the ways which he kind of um, departs from paganism and embraces his Roman Catholicism. Before we move on to maybe a little tribute to Bernard Hill, uh, I just want to say again thank you for all those who have commented so far. I've been enjoying looking over at the chat. I haven't been able to engage with it fully. I'll just say to my good friend Wolfish Naturalist, Catgirl Kulak is the Twitter account who posted a tweet basically saying why they don't like Tolkien, and they said because in their view it subverts Celtic and Germanic pagan ideals. If you want to see kind of more fully, go to the start of the stream, or maybe about 20 minutes into the stream, and then you'll get a broader picture of what that's all about. But yes, maybe just a few words on Bernard Hill before we get to the comments in the chat. I think we've been talking about Northern heroic courage. We've been talking about the struggles of men against inevitable doom and fate and the monsters. And I think, from my point of view, what Bernard Hill managed with King Theoden was the best representation of that was possible. He really captured the hopelessness of his situation as a withered old man, his mind poisoned by Grima Wormtongue with the prospect of despair and defeat. And then with Gandalf's encouragement, he really brings to life the resolute, we will fight to the end. Though he has his doubts, though he has his moments of weakness, he is a man after all. He nonetheless fights on. And this comes to a climax at his speech at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, which I read a bit of earlier. And at that moment, you feel like Theoden has truly reached who he's meant to be. He has become the embodiment of Northern courage. And very few actors could have pulled off this kind of range of emotions. He's not one-dimensional. He's not the perfect hero from the beginning. He has his weakness. He has his doubts. He is old and tired, after all. But through his emotional depth, Bernard was able to really bring us into the character of Theoden. We can identify with him. I can't identify with Aragorn so well. He is already in the film the perfect hero, whereas in the book there's more development. Whereas with Theoden, we can feel like we would feel like him in this situation. We would be grieving the death of our son. We would be doing our best, even though we don't think we're going to win. And then, but we can really embrace we can really embrace the kind of arc towards full committal. And so I think that's partly why so many people were saddened at his passing. He wasn't just another actor. He really brought Theoden to life, and to my mind, really elevated The Two Towers, because that film, for large parts of it, is a lot slower than the other two. Fellowship of the Ring, especially after the Council of Elrond, it's just like one thing after another. It's so jam-packed. It's just action, action, action. Maybe a little stop off in Lothlorien, but even that, it's still something happening. Return of the King, primarily a big battle at the Pelennor Fields with a bit of Frodo and Sam on the side. Whereas The Two Towers, it's a more complete movie, but it's slower in its build up. We're seeing Theoden and his court being manipulated by Wormtongue. We're seeing his inner struggles and his attempts to lead his people in against the Uruk-hai. We're seeing all of this over time, and several of the characters don't have a lot of depth. I would say most of the heroes in the film, they are pretty much got a straight on the nose. This is a hero. Certainly Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. Gandalf, there's a bit more in this film, but there's not loads. So what's going to draw us in? What's going to really be compelling and engaging? Well, Bernard Hill's performance of Theoden really kind of brings it to another level. Every time he's on screen, you want to see what he's going to say. You want to see what he's going to do. And he's magnetic. And I think also as well for men, particularly middle-aged men, and if I'm not already in that bracket, I am certainly closer to it. He is a character who gives inspiration because, for many middle-aged men in our society, you may have got far a certain degree in your career, may have a family, but opportunities of heroism have kind of, we often associate them with young men. But Theoden is an older man whose son has been killed actually, but gets a chance of that heroic life that he's always felt he never had, for a chance of attaining that worthiness that he doesn't feel he's got. His ancestors look down upon him with shame. He gets that chance, and he takes it. And so for many men of his kind of age, he's an inspirational figure. And again, that's down to Bernard Hill. Of course, he was in other things such as Titanic, as the ship's captain. Again, a kind of resolute figure like Theoden. But I just wanted to kind of give tribute to him for his work as King Theoden. He did a marvelous job of really conveying, I think, what Tolkien was getting at with this character, and really portraying on screen that northern heroic courage, which was so important to the Lord of the Rings and to Tolkien's worldview. So with that said, let us look at some comments. We'll look at the super chats first. Let me stop sharing this. Sorry. Can he get the staff these days? So we have a very generous donation of £10 from Ataman, a good friend. I've been on stream with him before on Iron Duke's channel. It was very good. I enjoyed talking to them both. And he says, in The Lord of the Rings, even in victory, we're keenly reminded that defeat comes in the end, that the kingdom of men is fated to die. London Mithraeum looks great. I'll have to go and visit. Thank you very much, Ataman. Yes, you do make a good point. When the victory is had, even when they get home, the hobbits, they find the Shire absolutely kind of wrecked by Saruman and his gangsters. Essentially, it's become a dystopia. So even defeating Sauron isn't enough to stave off evil. They do overcome this in the end, but somebody like Frodo, he's been wounded, both literally and spiritually, and he can't stay in Middle Earth anymore. He has to go. So evil remains, even with victory. And it's kind of foreseen that in time these things will fall as well, until there is one final climactic battle. So there is very much a sense of loss which comes with the victory. And we've already spoken about the elves lose their kingdom, right? They lose their power to stay within Middle Earth after the defeat of Sauron. So yeah, you're right that there is a an acknowledgement that this is a temporary victory. It may be an absolute victory over Sauron, but evil will never go away until the end. So I think maybe you make a good point there. Maybe that qualifies the eucatastrophic element within the tale. I would say as well, though, that in Tolkien's kind of notes and comments, he does foresee a final victory over evil in Middle Earth, which will then lead to the second and better paradise, what he calls Arda remade or Arda renewed. So he does have still a Christian kind of end, but certainly, like, that's a long way off from the Lord of the Rings. Within the Lord of the Rings, you're completely right, and that's what this conversation's been primarily about. So yes, thank you, and I hope you do go to London Mithraeum, and I hope to catch up with you soon, my friend. I'm going to the Witten this year, so if you are going, it'd be great to see you there. And thank you also to Ben Wheeler for $10. I don't know if they're American or not. Could be Australian. But yes, thank you very much, my friend. If God had not intended for us to slay the dragon, then he would not have put the dragon in front of us to slay. I await the time of dragon slaying, even to a most horrible but merely physical death. I agree with you, my friends. And I think Tolkien captured this, right? That at the Council of Elrond, they decide that no, we have to face this evil because we are the ones who have been put here, and we have to deal with it. Then, like, it's just a recognition of this. Because we're in this situation, we have a responsibility to fight against evil or resist evil in all the ways we can. So, yeah, and we've got to take that on board too. I was very struck by reading the Knights Templar, actually, about them. And St. Bernard of Clairvaux, he was one of the key figures who really advocated for the order and helped give them legitimacy. And he wrote a manifesto on their behalf. And I was really struck by one of the lines he had, because he contrasts the purely secular knight, the knight who fights for no religious cause or as part of no religious institution, and the Knights Templar. The secular knight, fights for his own glory or wealth or power, and thus for Bernard, when he kills another person, he is a murderer. His causes are illegitimate. Whereas the Knights Templar, being solely devoted to Jesus Christ and serving his will, when he kills, he does not kill a man. But what does Bernard say? He kills evil itself, because he's only killing what Jesus requires him to kill. He's only fighting against that which is against Jesus, the Lord Jesus Christ. So it's a very strong idea of, holy war, you might say. But in a way, that's kind of what you're getting at here. That in the service of Christ, we have to kill evil. That's how the Knights Templar saw their activities. They would restrain their hand where possible, but where God had called them to violence, they used it to defeat evil, not other men. So yeah, I can see that. So let's have a look. Oh, great! Ataman will be at the Witten, so that's super, and I hope many of you others will also be there too. Let's just have a quick look at some of the comments. I'm not going to spend too long. We've been here for nearly 2 hours, and I appreciate there are other streams that people may want to be watching as well. It's just the way things worked out this week. I work most evenings, so it's a little bit tricky to stream. But tonight was a good one in that respect. Let's see. So Wolfish Naturalist, you were saying, I think, that when I said Odin, Theoden is the Odin figure in the Lord of the Rings. I think you were saying here, no, Turin is. Well, and I know you know this, but let's just clear this up. So I was focusing primarily on the Lord of the Rings. So in that respect, I think Theoden is the most clear comparison to Odin. Turin, I can see that aspect because he is that tragic figure who re- tries to resist his fate where possible and is still ends up in a tragic situation. I'm not totally convinced because he is placed under a curse, and so he's a bit unlike Odin in that respect. But there is definitely a parallel. I'd also add as well that Turin. Well, I was going to say he's not a virtuous character, but in many ways neither is Odin. Uh, or at least not in a classical or Christian sense. But then you may not have a problem with that. You may see it differently. What are virtues and what are vices? But Turin is a very foolhardy individual who leads to the destruction of many places because he doesn't listen to other people's advice. He's rash and prone to fits of anger and so on. This is not. He is not. He's a hero in for his martial prowess, and he has a certain ability, but he's a very flawed hero. Um, Whereas I think Theoden captures more of that resistance for its own sake is worthwhile. But yeah, I can see that the Turin bears a parallel with Odin too. Let's see. Um, Great to see so many friends here. Agreed. The last stand is a thing of power, my friend, and it comes from a place of power. Indeed, one of the things I've been thinking about, and I may talk more about this in the future, is that I think too often we're fighting or doing our politics within the frame of our enemies. Even the concepts we're using buy into their um, kind of lexicon and conceptual framework. I don't. An example might be, def, fighting over the political future of Britain, because that in itself assumes a certain idea of Britain, right? What is Britain? Well, it's an abstraction. It's a set of institutions, um, divorced from the people who gave rise to them. Now, I know that's not necessarily how we would see it, but that is the political kind of connotation of a word like Britain or the United Kingdom. It's a bureaucratic institutions like the NHS. And so when we're fighting over its future, we're fighting over the future of those institutions. Whereas, and that's like right or left. Whereas, to my mind, we need a different set of concepts to for what we want to advocate for. So we've got to inhabit a different frame from the system, from the regime, from the bureaucratic institutions themselves, to something which is more centered on the people. And I don't mean that in an egalitarian sense, because again, the people is a flattening term, or ethnos is a flattening term. I'd prefer to say like the sons of Brutus, or uh, the descendants of King Arthur, or something like that. Something with a concrete historical relation or mythological relation. So when you make a last stand, what's going on there? Where you're taking your frame, your vision, and you're not buying into the vision of the other, and you'd rather break than be bent into the vision of the other. And in these kind of tales, it's a physical resistance, but the attitude can be carried forward into our own day. We don't need to conform. We don't need to m- remain within this matrix. We can break out of it and we can embrace a new frame. And when you do that, you're asserting power, right? When I play into their frame, I'm giving them power. I mean, even the act of complaining about them gives them power. Why? Because it's like I can't do anything about it, so I'm going to complain and I'm going to hope that they listen and change their minds, or I'm going to hope somebody listens and then that'll help us change their mind. I'm hoping somebody else with power will do it. Whereas if I don't say I'm not going to complain about them anymore, rather what I'm going to do is I'm going to assert my vision, and then I'm going to try and bring it into being. I think we should do this, and I'm going to do this. Maybe it shouldn't even be I think we should do this. It's like I'm going to do this. This is what I am going to bring into reality. That's a power stance, and it manifests. It brings it forward. It's if we're the way we're thinking about it frames us as weak, then we're not going to act accordingly. But if we're framing this in a way that we have power, then okay, we might not have all the resources at the moment, but your whole approach is going to be different, and people are going to react to you differently. You are going to have that kind of strength that people respond to accordingly. And in a way, it manifests itself into being over time. If you are embracing a vision in which you have power, then lo and behold, your possibilities open up. And perhaps you're able to acquire those things that you currently lack. Whereas if you come from the place of weakness, then you're never going to get that. So that was it. That was a big tangent, but I definitely agree. I think that's part of it. The last stand is a thing of power. It's an assertion of what you stand for, what you fight for, and you will not be broken by it. Sorry, you will not be bent. You would rather be broken. Yes, this is very true. Alfred the Great was a Christian king and claimed descent from Woden. And I think this is an important point reflected in Tolkien, that the Anglo-Saxon Christians, Tolkien, they didn't see a tension between the pagan and the Christian, at least not explicit, maybe rather a fulfillment or an incorporation of certain elements, maybe moving beyond. But it wasn't like they're antithetical. And I think that's something to bear in mind in all this conversation. This is very true, and I think it's also a weakness with the original tweet, right? It's seeing it as an allegory of politics rather than like a story which has certain meanings. That's yeah. I mean, all of the Norse myths as we have them, even like as far back as we can kind of trace their origins, post-date Christianity. But that doesn't mean that they were informed by Christianity directly, right? Although it's difficult. The texts themselves come preserved by monks and are written down by monks. So there's always going to be a Christian gloss in that respect. Certainly, some of the Volupsa seems to be informed by contemporaneous Christian poetry, but perhaps those stories themselves predate Christian engagement. The difficulty is, of course, that while people want to make a big distinction between Christianity and paganism, ultimately these are branches of Indo-European religions. So despite the fact that Christianity and Norse paganism have certain value differences, they belong to the same family of religions, so they're going to have overlap. So it's I often think there's too much of a division made in certain respects. Let's see. Good to see you, Shiatori. I would bet that an Anglo-Saxon or other Germanic person from the pre-Christian world would look at LOTR and say, let Ragnarok happen, let the world end, and be reborn anew. Yeah, I think that's right. Can't disagree with that. Go up a wee bit more. Interesting take, KJ. I don't know any more about Catgirl, but I'll take your word that they have some good political takes, at least some, in very heavily kind of some good takes. And glory to the victorious dead, indeed. And I've seen that a few times in the chat to Bernard Hill. This was the other side, right? And I actually kind of alluded to this a little bit, but Catgirl's take on Wagner is completely wrong. Or at least, let me be fair, it's not completely wrong, but it ignores huge aspects within Wagner, not least that, okay, at the beginning, Wotan tries to take the ring to save Valhalla, or really for his own power. But by the end of it, he's come to the realization that what he was doing was evil, that his attempts to build power itself is evil for Wagner, and Wotan comes to realize that, and so seeks the destruction of Valhalla. This doesn't sound like it really supports Catgirl's point. But selective reading goes quite far, I suppose. Charlemagne, good to see you, my friend. The ring doesn't give you power. It's only Sauron's power in the ring. It makes you his slave, aka Satan's slave. Indeed, this is a good point. The promises the ring tempts people with are illusory. They think they're going to have power. They're going to end up like little wraiths or Gollum or something like that. Characters like Gandalf could wield the ring. Tolkien makes that clear. But they themselves would become new Saurons, essentially. So you're never unaffected. And this is the lie of modernity coming through, I think. We think we can do things and we can do wicked things and remain good people. You'll often hear people who live degenerate lifestyles still saying, oh yeah, but I'm still a good person. I can lie, I can cheat, I can steal from my friends, I can betray them, but I'm still a good person. I'm not a Nazi, I'm not Adolf Hitler, right? I didn't kill anyone, I didn't hurt anyone. But in the ancient world, everything we do, not only does it change our moral character, like it has a little effect on it, chipping it away or pushing it little by little in different directions, but it actually like changes the quality of who we are. It kind of clothes us. So like Oedipus, he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. He didn't know the man he was killing was his father, or the woman he slept with was his mother. But nonetheless, these are like horrible, disgusting things. And so they taint him, they stain his being. The idea you could just use the ring and remain unaffected is like it's a modern cope, it's an illusion. And the very fact we kind of have to even wrestle with that. People in the past, they may have wrestled with this question to some extent, but I don't think I can't foresee like a medieval person really like thinking they could use the ring. I think they would recognize instinctively that this would be a dangerous thing. Like Faust is pretty aware that he's making a deal with the devil, and it becomes a real spiritual battle throughout the story whether he can repent or not. Yeah, I just don't buy this kind of logic at all. Let's see. We'll jump to the end here. Asserting visions. I still have dreams of A.A. Trumpton, but I only have puissance in literature, therefore I have visions of superversive dominance. Yes, well, that would be a good thing. And people should check out the superversive stuff. It is good. And it's making a difference. And as in an age where huge corporations milk the last vestiges of old forms of Tolkien and Star Wars and so on, these guys are creating original content which is in the spirit of these great writers, but in new directions. So you should check out their stuff. Wolfish Naturalist. It's an important point about Alfred because the popularity of Da Vinci Code themes are in fact repackaged holy descent from Wotan Odin given a Christian makeup. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it in that way, but you're totally right. It's kind of important, or a kind of magical nature of blood is definitely as found in the Da Vinci Code, comes from this sort of root source. So yeah, I can see that. We think that we can do wicked things and still remain good people, carved out on the side of a mountain. If only we could. If only we could. Yeah, it's. I mean, maybe older ages thought this too, but it's definitely one of the prevailing visions of this age, and the idea that you could use the ring is definitely part of that. And maybe that's why it is the temptation it is. Yes, Ataman. They slightly reshape the ring's natures in the film as compared to the books. They need to adapt the ring to a modern framing. Yeah, that's true. I mean, in the films, I find that's one of the weakest points. Actually, is the ring. I mean, it's difficult. Is how do you convey temptation in a struggle in a compelling way? In the books, you can get into the mind of a character. You can enter into Frodo's soul. You can't really do that. And in the film, he just ends up a kind of druggy who has kind of mood swings. It's not very convincing. The films, I think you could make an argument perhaps that the films are much more like the pagan, focusing on a physical battle between gods, heroes, and monsters, whereas the books tie in more with the Christian romance idea of the medieval era. With that aspect, indeed, the book is a lot lighter on the battles than the films as well. So that could be an interesting kind of difference there. But yeah, they do kind of change the ring to a certain extent. Hello, Vingle. Good to see you. You're a good friend, as are all these people that I've been talking to. I hope to see you soon. Shia Tori. So in the remake of Lord of the Rings, I imagine the ring is misunderstood, and using Machiavellian power is a moral good. I mean, that's what Catgirl wants us to believe, right? So yeah, it would be the way it would be framed. I could see Tony Blair, an academic agent, writing this version of the Lord of the Rings for sure. David in with a late spicy take. I think Frodo didn't have the right to destroy the ring. You're gonna have to say more than that, mate. I don't know. I don't know where you're coming from. I mean, if it's property rights, I think it. At the end of the day, if you're a Dark Lord seeking to enslave the whole world, you've probably forfeited your property rights. I mean, I can't even believe I said that sentence. But also, Frodo was appointed to this quest, and Elrond's quite clear. It's not by anyone at the Council of Rivendell. It's by the higher power, whether we call that God or fate, or providence or something else. Okay, here he comes in. Sauron has to be given a last-ditch ultimatum from the king. See, Tolkien's quite interesting on this because you're kind of referring to mercy here, and this is a very strong theme throughout the books that in the main, characters are given a chance of of redemption. So take like Grima Wormtongue. He has betrayed the people of Rohan. He has, been working for the enemy, Saruman, and subverting the defenses, destroying the capability of the Rohirrim to defend themselves from an invading enemy. And, many people would just have him executed. They would at least punish him. But Theoden, he gives him a chance. He says, you can do what you will. You can ride by my side. You can prove your worth. You can fight for Rohan and prove that you are loyal to us. And, the matter will be done. You can go somewhere else. You can even go back to Saruman. But you have this one chance to make the right choice. After that, if I meet you again, you will be killed. And this kind of mercy is repeated throughout the story. So after the Battle of Helm's Deep, though the orcs and Uruk-hai are killed by the Huorns, these living trees, the men surrender, and the Rohirrim don't kill them, don't massacre them. They agree a treaty with them that they will never again attack their lands. They basically spare their lives, which is a great surprise to the Dunlings, because they had been told by Saruman that the Rohirrim were cannibals and would sacrifice them and this kind of stuff. And then again at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, after the defeat of Sauron, Aragorn spares the lives of the Easterlings and Haradrim, makes peace deals with them, they go on their way. So there is this kind of repeated pattern, and Tolkien goes as far as saying that the elves believed that if an orc ever surrendered, they would spare its life. That's quite an amazing kind of statement to make. It's taking mercy to the extreme. And there's various reasons Tolkien kind of holds this view. I mean, it's deeply Christian in the sense that he can see that we deserve wrath and God has given us mercy through Jesus Christ, right? But in the books, in the Lord of the Rings, Gandalf has this big speech to Frodo where he talks about how, okay, a character like Gollum deserves death, but who are we to judge that? And moreover, if we show mercy, then it may turn out that this person does something for good. And this carries through with Gollum, that actually, if he had been killed by Frodo when he had the chance, he wouldn't have been there to take the ring from Frodo at Mount Doom and unintentionally destroying the ring. So there is this kind of strong theme. So why is mercy not shown to Sauron? Well, in all of those previous instances, the mercy is shown once the other force is no longer an existential threat. So the orcs wouldn't be shown mercy in the middle of battle, but they would be shown mercy if they surrendered. Wormtongue is shown mercy once he has been defeated. And the point is with Sauron that at that point, he is not defeated. He is actually defeated in an earlier tale in the Silmarillion, but he is not, and he reneges on that mercy essentially. But he is not. He's not defeated. He is still an existential threat. And the reality is, unless the ring is destroyed, Sauron will always be an existential threat to the people of Middle-earth. He will always be a force seeking to enslave them and to destroy them. And so, as a consequence, mercy cannot be shown to such a being. He must be defeated. The evil he embodies must be defeated. There can be no quarter given. But it goes even beyond that. And I mean, there's several reasons, but I think one for Tolkien is simply this as well. And this perhaps ties into the previous point. Tolkien says that the Lord of the Rings is fundamentally a battle against idolatry. Now, it doesn't seem like that on the surface, right? If you read the story, you wouldn't necessarily come away with that. Certainly not from the films. But if you've read the Silmarillion and the Accalibur, you understand the context here. Sauron isn't just wanting to dominate Middle Earth. In so doing, he wants to be taking the role of a deity. He wants to be God. And he, insofar as he wants to be able to control all of reality, all of history, and dominate every creature. That is idolatrous. And given there is a god of Middle Earth, Eru Iluvatar, who is alone worthy of that role, he is seeking to usurp it. He is playing a satanic role. And so Tolkien says in one of his letters that the forces of good would be justified in taking any action to destroy Sauron, even if it meant like genocide. Now, of course, they don't do that. They are moral, they are heroic. But Tolkien feels that strongly about this issue, that idolatry is just evil and thus merits pure destruction. So that's kind of Tolkien's justification, and I think these 2 points, um, I mean, they convinced me that destroying the ring was a good thing, and questions of rights, I don't buy. Again, it's maybe pushing it too politically, or trying to make, and then maybe that's the third point, bringing it back round to what we said earlier. This isn't a battle between two political factions. We shouldn't see it like that. It's not like England v Germany or Ukraine v Russia. This is fundamentally a battle on a different plane. It's good v evil, and so the questions are on a different scale. This is represented by the fact that Sauron and the orcs are monsters, whereas mercy is shown to the ambivalent groups of humans. Right? Humans can be good and evil. So I think it kind of pushes, when we see it in that way. It's the kind of nature of the issue is is the nature of the issue isn't like the normal rules of war, and where it is human combatants, the characters do show mercy. So yeah, I think there's a number of ways I would disagree with your comment there, David. But I take what you're saying seriously. I don't think it's just a silly point. I think you are raising a point which builds on what Tolkien's own values would maybe make us question. So yeah, I thank you for your point. Let's see. Well, I mean, this is true. This is true, and he is in his effects are felt within all the material worlds of Middle Earth, right? And will come to a head in the end of times, which you've already alluded to, when Turin will sort it out. He will have his redemption. But yes, I think that goes beyond this stream for sure. It will be featuring in my book, though. I'm writing a book currently on the Lord of the Rings and all this stuff, so you can engage more with it when I have that book published one day in the long, long future. Yes, Sauron wanted order. I'd take him over what we have at the moment, to be honest. You had me so close to the coming towards the pagan view. Then you say this sort of thing. Totally undermined it. Shocking missionary attempts here. Shia Dori. I guess you can determine that Sauron as an entity is a revolt against the natural order. Thing is, he's ever waking presence all the time is a sin. I mean, yes, he is revolted against the natural order. I think Tolkien would say he is a fallen angel of sorts. So he is created as a good being. There's no inherently evil beings from the original creation. I think it's a different matter with Ungoliant. We could just, but that's a separate issue. Sauron was created as good and fell due to pride. So he's not wholly evil. There are good aspects insofar as he's created by a good god. But he has revolted against the natural order, despite the fact he was given the chance to repent by Manwë after the defeat of Morgoth. So yeah, his I wouldn't say it's his presence; it's more the inherent presence. Rather, it's his decision to basically set himself up as God, which is more explicit in the stories around the fall of Numenor, which mean that his presence is a revolt against the natural order. And until he repents of that, he will always and because of his power, he will always be a threat. Yes. What okay, so we'll look at one comment here from David, last comment here. The genius of the ring is that to destroy it, you'd have to step out of your own rules of justice, thereby falling to its power. I'm not convinced by that, my friend David. Um, I think it's entirely just to destroy that which poses an existential threat. Because the ring is an instrument, it's a machine for Tolkien. That's how he describes it. Magic, it's a magical instrument, i.e., a machine instrument. It's a way for Sauron to enslave the entire world and reduce it to an extension of his will. Whereas by destroying it, you retain the freedom of beings which have an integrity, who have a dignity to their own independent existence, even if you can't make them conform to you. So I just don't think that is the case. And then, okay, so you say, I mean, they are at war, so the chance to peacefully end war has to come first. And so Frodo can't complete it until that's happened. But the problem with this is that Sauron has no intention of ending the war, and this is abundantly clear. It's well known that he's going to destroy all opposition, and he's going to enslave the world. He has no intentions of repenting. I guess you're wanting to say that he should formally declare. This needs to be formally declared by Sauron. But I think I think at best you might get a ceasefire while Sauron still builds his forces, and you end up with him then just rolling over everywhere. When you had the chance to destroy, again, not just a political enemy, but an existential threat to the entire world, an evil threat to that which is good. But yeah, I will think about it a bit more. I'll go away and think about this. um, before we wrap up, let me just say a couple of things and give a last chance for any further comments or super chats. So, in a few weeks' time, on the 25th of May, that is Saturday, the 25th of May, we have um, King Arthur Day, and King Arthur Day will be a series of videos and streams which will look at the historical and legendary King Arthur, the stories that surround him, both whether he was a historical character and the themes which have manifested themselves across literature for over 1,000 years. And not just literature, film and music too. We're going to be joined by a number of guests. We have several lined up already. Those including Pharaoh, Gifts Ungiven, John Dee. We have Scott Mannion potentially. Rupert August might be available. I know Apostolic Majesty is planning something for it, and a host of others as well. It's promising. Oh, Luke from Lambda Bible Studies is going to do something. We've got potentially Simon. Well, we've got Simon Roberts. We've got potentially Black Horse. It's looking like it's going to be a really good cast of people, and some others who you will know may be featuring too. So please look out for that. There may be some more stuff in the building up to it. If you would like to contribute to it, please get in touch with me as soon as possible. My door is open for conversations with that in mind. So yes, this has been a lot of fun. It's been a massive kind of engagement with the topic, but I'm really glad I did it. I think we had a productive engagement with this tweet, which, although it was very baity, has actually led to a fruitful conversation about the Lord of the Rings. And I'm very grateful to all of your engagement, your attention. And yeah, if you have any further comments, please put them below the video. I look forward to reading them and engaging with them. And yeah, we'll catch up soon. So all that remains for me to say is, whoever you are, wherever you are, God bless you, and I hope you have a good rest of your morning or night. Bye for now, my friend. Bye.